So the topic, you have chosen for me is Specialist Generalist Complex. So now before we get into this, what is Specialist Generalist Complex, I'll just show you how I've constructed this entire webinar structure. Okay, first of all, we'll be looking at what is a specialist, who is a specialist, how is the relationship between a specialist and a generalist has evolved over the times, and today how are we going to look at this relationship. And the second part is, since I'm an advocate, after engineering I did my advocacy, and since I've been part of the judicial process, I've taken the option of enlightening you with certain aspects of judiciary, which I've broadly classified under corridors of justice. Then thirdly, I've took upon the initiative to interact with you about bureaucracy, the executive, how the specialist and generalist narrative is actually flowing in terms of judiciary as well as the executive. At the end of these three topics, three dimensions, I think we'll have a good Q&A session. Okay, and now moving on. Firstly, I think the screen is visible and I've given you a scenario. Okay, you are stuck in an island with two people who could help you out. Okay, the island is an isolated island, and on one hand, I think you can correlate with Sheldon Cooper, the nerd. Okay, and he has a supercomputer by which he can actually construct an aeroplane to get out of the place. And the second one is you have Tarzan. If you want, we can take it as Mowgli also, our very own Tarzan. And he knows, he's a survivalist. Okay, he knows how to survive. He knows how to fish. He knows the jungles. He knows to make ropes out of barks. He knows the island. He knows when to hunt, when to fish, where the great whites are. Okay, so now you are stuck with these two people. Now the question is, who are you going to choose? Is it Sheldon Cooper or the Tarzan? Okay. I hope I can get few replies on the chat box.
Okay.
Okay. Now I'll give you another scenario also. Okay, I think people are actually selecting. Yes. Good. So let's go with Tarzan. Now the second scenario, I'm giving you a second scenario. Okay. There is an attack on our beloved Prime Minister's residence, and the Honorable Prime Minister is pinned down with only two people on his side. Okay. Who would he trust with his life? Okay. Who would he trust would save his life? On one hand, his trusted lieutenant, our Honorable Home Minister, and on the other hand, we have our very own Captain America. So who would be the choice among them? Okay, these are two scenarios. Okay, in one scenario, there was Sheldon Cooper and Tarzan, and on the other scenario, we have our very own Home Minister and Captain America. So this is the basic premise on which the specialist generalist complex construct is being debated. Okay, obviously in this instance, the choice of most of us would be Tarzan. Now here Tarzan is not a specialist. Okay, he doesn't know anything. He knows everything, but he's not a master at anything. But in the second instance, we are going for an expert. Prime Minister would probably, though our Home Minister is the most trusted, his lieutenant, still I think he would more preferably opt for Captain America to save his life. And here he is going with a specialist. Okay, so it is not a matter of specialist versus generalist, but the whole idea is based on the situation, we choose specialists and we choose generalists. Now, how is this construct? Okay, the entire construct. So who are these specialists? Okay, firstly, when we consider someone as specialist, see, let's take the example of medical field, physicians. Okay, they generally complete with MBBS, right? And after completing MBBS, they move on and then they do their specialization. So as a generalist, we call it as general medicine, and then we move to specialization. Even when we start with our engineering course, the first years would be the basic engineering course, which is nothing but a generalized course where you are being shown, okay, you're being looked upon to learn certain things which are very general across all the departments. So that is a generalization. Then you go into your specializations, be it EEE, ECE, mechanical, or civil. So who are these specialists? These specialists are nobody other than one who has mastered the skill of one particular trade. Okay. And then I use these exclusive terms. Okay. The terms are exclusive proficient domain knowledge. A person who has exclusive proficient domain knowledge is considered a specialist. To give a better example, I'll say you look at news debates and all this 9 o'clock prime time news and everything. Okay, when we come across them, we come across certain people for certain topics. We invite certain people alone to talk. For example, right now we have an issue going on the LAC. Okay, line of actual control, India versus China, and there we see certain people who I mean, there will be political people, fine, but there will be always some experts who are specialists. Specialists in the sense retired army generals, retired ambassadors, retired diplomats, retired people. Think tank people. So all these are called exclusive because the knowledge that they have are exclusive, and they are the masters or they're proficient in their own knowledge, and that is why I use the terms exclusive proficient domain knowledge. So these specialists have exclusive proficient domain knowledge, and that term that we often uses professionals. For example, they are doctors, engineers, advocates, etc. And apart from these popularly used terms as professionals, the other specialists are also historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, epidemiologists, economists, statisticians, etc., etc. To give you a very good example, I'll say, for example, we all know that recently, in the 2019, sometime we had the verdict of Ayodhya case. And when the Ayodhya case came, the Supreme Court actually wanted to dig up the entire structure to see what lies underneath. So immediately they went on to archaeologists because they are considered to be specialists in that field and they have the domain knowledge. And epidemiologist is a term that is often used more often right now, which many of us not would have heard a long time back. And who are these epidemiologists? Epidemiologists are nothing but medical professionals who doesn't deal with actual physician's role, but who trace the diseases, the cause of the diseases, and identifying the cure of the diseases. Right now, the corona pandemic or COVID-19 pandemic is spreading, and now is the role of an epidemiologist more relevant. Okay, even now when you see TV debates or whatever, you see more of the opinions being given by epidemiologists rather than the actual physicians. Similarly, economists. For example, chief economic advisor was a post that we had earlier. Usually is dominated by an economist. And then we had this RBI. Right now, there is a generalist who is sitting in that chair. Okay, but prior to that, Raghuram Rajan or the other persons, they were all purely economists who are nothing but specialists who had exclusive proficient domain knowledge in their stream of things. And now coming to the thing, who are these generalists? One who has a fair knowledge of all the trades, but not an expert in any. The common term that we use is jack of all trades, but master of none. So that is something associated with generalists. Okay. And now, where do we find these generalists? We find these generalists as we move into the higher echelons of any institution or organizational setup. At the lower rung, we'll mostly be employing or we'll be using the specialists. Whereas as we move higher into the echelons of any institution or organizations, we find generalists who are more management oriented, who are more administrative oriented. So generally, when we talk about generalists, we talk about administrator, we talk about bureaucrats, we talk about lawmakers, and we talk about managers. Okay. Now, I'll briefly describe the debate, how we view why one is being always pitted against the other. Padmashri, am I going too fast? Hello? Am I going too fast or am I fine? Okay. Now, looking at the generalists. Okay, this is the debate that always goes on. So, who are these generalists? These generalists are semi-prepared for a variety of occurrences. Okay, they are not proficient in everything, but they have a brief knowledge about many things, and any type of occurrence or whatever, they will be the first person to respond, and they are expected to perform. Okay, and the opposite of that is a specialist who is well prepared, who knows what he is doing, who knows the outcome, who can actually give a measurable outcome. Whereas a generalist, we can use these two terms. One, for generalists, we can use the term as outcome, whereas with specialists, we can use the term as output. When we use the terms outcomes and outputs, outcomes are more subjective and are not completely measurable. For example, poverty alleviation. Okay, defining the poverty itself is a big task. After defining poverty, okay, the poverty alleviation. So, what do you consider as poverty? Then, what is the outcome? And I'll give you another thing. Okay, for example, we talk about midday meal scheme. When you talk about midday meal scheme, what is the whole objective that you want to achieve out of that midday meal scheme? Do you want these to students to be healthy, or do you want the students to come to school, or do you want the students to not parents to not feel the burden of sending to school or taking care of the children? So these are all the outcomes. So there are no concrete measurable outcomes. I mean, we can measure them, but that is not the whole objective of the program. So when a generalist comes up with a policy or a plan, his whole objective is not about coming out to the quantitative measurable outputs, but rather to come out with an outcomes. On the other hand, with the specialist, he clear-cutly knows what is expected. He knows what is going to be the outcome. He will use the mathematical tools. He will use the statistician tools. All these tools at his disposal, we engineers, we know that input, output, everything is measurable. We first draw the circuits, we come up with the outputs, and then we go into the practical aspects of this. So those are the actual specialists. And they are not prepared for everything. Okay, they have their own specific domain knowledge, and they are prepared only for those few occurrences, and those are called as specialists. I'll give you another better example for considering a specialist. We have NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, and then we have fire brigade, and then we have the police. Okay, so there are three forces. Let's consider these three forces alone. Okay, so the police are exclusive for maintaining law and order, while as the fire brigade tends only to fire related accidents. Of course, today, apart from fire accidents, even other minor things also they are intended. But whenever a disaster occurs, a natural cyclone or an earthquake or anything, though the fire brigade and the police are the first respondents, the specialists are considered as NDRF, nothing but National Disaster Response Force. Okay, so those are kind of specialists. Yeah, the easiest example, even more better and easiest example would be a general physician and a specialist heart surgeon. Okay, of course, this specialist heart surgeon also could prescribe medicines for as a generalist, but a generalist can never perform the cardiosurgery, whereas a specialist in cardio surgery would naturally be more a specialist in that sort of surgeries. And then the second one, how does generalist view the outcomes? Okay, success and failures are averaged out. Okay, it is like there is no clear-cut success, there is no clear-cut failure. Think about a policy that is being brought about. For example, demonetization as a policy. Okay, when you think about demonetization of policy, is it a success or a failure? Okay, we can argue on both ends that yes, it was a success, that it brought in digitalization of economy, it made ease of payments more easier, and one more important success for demonetization is considered that the money which was in circulation, when RBI said that 99% of money came back to the banks, one aspect of it is that where is the black money gone? That may be considered as failure. Okay, the black money is still in the banking system, which is in the formal system. So naturally, one might consider that okay, demonetization failed. But to look at it on the brighter side, one might say that see, so much money has come into the banking system, which means that bank is flooding with cash. So the credit capacity of banks has increased, so the banks can lend more. Okay, so that is one of the successes. So in this, can we say that demonetization in general is a success or a failure? It is always debatable. Okay, whereas in a specialist case, we can always say that something is if at all there will be one success and he doesn't care about the rest. Okay, so for example, take the example of a heart surgeon itself. He performs a surgery and it is a success or a failure. Take the case of ISRO, the rocket scientist. If it launches into the space, it's success or else it is not. DRDO, missile tests, all are nothing but specialist forces. Okay, that is the other aspect of specialists. And now coming back to the third point. Okay, how do generalists view everything? Just like an eagle. Okay, they have this bird's eye view. They look at everything in general. They monitor everything. Usually when we use a systems approach, we say that there will be a master system, there will be subsystems, and these generalists are considered to be as the master system, whereas the other things are considered as subsystem. So what they will be doing is they will be managing the subsystems. They look at the subsystems and they'll have a bird's eye view. Okay, whereas the specialists have a what we call popularly as a tunnel vision. Okay, their vision will be narrowed. Their object, they will be too objective. And whereas the generalists are subjective, the specialists are considered to be too objective. Particularly the technocrats, we engineers are considered to be too objective. And then coming to the next point, this is an important aspect of it. Preference for EQ and there's a preference for IQ. How is your outcome or output measured? Here I said that here it is outcome, whereas here we say it as output. Okay, so how is the thing measured? Here, when we say outcome, it is not about the numbers. We don't use hard crunched data as quantitative numbers or statistics. That we use that as tools, but that is not the important aspect of it. Whereas for specialists, it is the output. Where is the theoretically if you derive at something, and practically where is this? If at all the rocket doesn't reach the space, why has it failed? After 3 attempts of cryo engine, on the 4th attempt we got successful with the cryo engine. So we quantitatively say that thrice we fail in the cryogenic engine stage when we are launching GSLV. Whereas which entails that when you look for a specialist kind of thing, we look more for an IQ. For example, we logical reasoning, all these things tests we prepare, and usually the HR when we go for placements and everything, HR will be sitting over there, and HR is usually considered as the last stage. And when we consider as the last stage, if we clear the technical round and everything, HR stage mostly, I mean, the rate of clearing the HR round would be very high. The reason is in technical fields, there is a preference for IQ. If you're technically sound, technically too good, that is more than efficient. Okay, but whereas in generalists, EQ is nothing but emotional quotient. Okay, having an IQ is also important, but there is a preference for EQ because you're not managing things, but you're managing people, you're managing sections, you're managing societies, you're managing equations. Okay, so there is a preference for EQ. So now what is this EQ? Okay, and I carefully mentioned that there is a preference. I'm not saying that the other one is not needed. All I'm saying is that there is a preference for EQ for a generalist, whereas with respect to a specialist, there is a preference for IQ. So that is valued more with respect to a specialist, whereas for generalists, it is the EQ that is valued more. That is why when we elect managers, when we elect lawmakers, the MLAs, MPs, presidential election, whatever. Okay, when they select bureaucrats for bureaucracy, okay, what is tested more is the EQ and not the IQ. IQ is needed. I'm not saying that IQ is not at all needed. All I'm saying is there is a huge preference for EQ. When a politician, when a lawmaker is being successful, why is he considered successful? Because he has a great IQ? No. If at all a person with a great IQ is going to lead us, then it should be some person who, I mean, Einstein's or Tesla should be leading us. But who we have are people who have the certain set of skills, who can manage sections of people, who can analyze things, who can look at it in the general. What sort of expertise does they have? They have only people managing skills. Okay, so that is something that is equated with EQ. Okay, and then now coming to even more closer to us. Okay, so when you talk about generalists, okay, the careers are usually flexible because you're a jack of all trades. You know everything. I mean, you know something in everything. So if not this, you can move to that. If not plan A, you can always move to plan B. If not plan B, you can always move to plan C. You can have n number of plans. Okay, you'll have a flexible career, but there's a drawback also for that. And whereas the specialists have a very stable career. Okay, which means that they'll be set, done. If I'm a rocket scientist, I'm a rocket scientist. I cannot move to agriculture. I cannot move to anything else. Okay, I cannot manage businesses. I'm a rocket scientist. Done. So they have a fixed career. Okay, whereas the generalists have a flexible career. They can be moving around everywhere. See, that is why when we see retired judges, retired bureaucrats coming out, they'll be acting as consultants. Okay, consultants. Even law firms. Okay, usually what is considered as the ranking of advocates. Once you reach the rank of senior counsel, okay, you're not supposed to engage any clients. The very notion that you're being given the title of senior counsel is for you to assist the court. Okay, you're not supposed to argue on behalf of any client. Rather, you're going to assist this court to come out with different perspectives, different views, to come out with a qualified judgment. Okay, that is the whole objective of elevating certain people to senior counsel. However, what does the senior counsel do? So that is why when you enter a courtroom, you will never find the name of a senior counsel mentioned in any of the cases cause list. We call cause list. Cause list is nothing but what are the list of cases, who are the representing advocates, and it gives a detail of the number of cases on that particular day, the ordering and everything. You will never find a name of a senior counsel on the cause list. The reason is they are supposed to assist the case. Okay, so I was like, flexible career, flexible career. So that is why post-retirement they are moving into. Even now, the recently one issue came up where one of the retired High Court judges of Mumbai gave one opinion to a foreign firm, okay, regarding a certain defense deal. Not defense deal. It was about extradition of Malaya, I think. Extradition of Malaya, I think. Vijay Malaya. And at that time, they made a huge hue and cry saying that, okay, how can he argue on behalf of known offender, okay, an absconding offender and everything. He said that I am a retired judge and I'm entitled to give my legal opinion. Okay. In reality, once you are retired, you are not supposed to practice in any court. I mean, a High Court judge is not supposed to practice in any court, any high courts or higher than that course. But here he has the option of giving opinions. The former Chief Justice of India, Mr. Justice Ranjan Gogoi, today is a Rajya Sabha MP. Okay, these are all generalists which have a flexible career. Okay, as you move higher, your career becomes flexible. Whereas the problem with flexible career, problem with flexible career is you are not concrete. You are dispensable. Okay, but whereas in stable careers where you are a specialist, stability of career means that you have a long-term tenure with respect to your career. You will be set in your career, you can sit on it, you can move in your career, you can develop on it, you can actually micromanage and everything. Okay, but the problem with stable career is once that sort of economy drops, that sort of, what to say, that activity itself becomes redundant, your career is shattered and you will not be able to do anything else. Okay, it is like you're covering yourself in a small shell. That is one problem with a stable career. Okay, and then comes the what does a generalist give away to gain something? Okay, what a generalist gives away is depth. He doesn't go deep into anything, rather he expands his horizons. He looks at everything from a bird's eye view. He expands his breadth of knowledge. But he never goes deep into any sort of knowledge. On the other hand, when you take a specialist, okay, they sacrifice the breadth, they go deep into it. Okay, and coming to the next aspect, these generalists are naturally considered as leaders. Okay, because they have this broader perspective, they have this broader view, they look at it in a bigger, they look the bigger picture and they could lead it. And I'm using this term provider and not follower because here I'm not saying, I mean, these differentiations are not concrete by itself, it is just a broader classification, and this is how the entire debate is constructed. Okay, and when we talk about why I use the term provider is and not a follower, because uh, these providers can one day become a generalist, and that is how it is done. Okay, you'll start at the lower career, I mean your career, you'll start at the lower end, then you'll move higher, then you'll move higher. As you move higher, you will take the role of a leadership positions. Okay, so that is the basic difference. And now this debate, and how this debate is constructed is that do we need generalists or specialists? Okay, and one way to look at it is these, we all start as generalists. For example, in your very first years, we start with all the basic engineering subjects, basic electrical, basic mechanical, basic everything. And then as you move into your core electrical and electronic subjects. Okay, initially it will be like the basis, and as you move to the third years and final years, you will be more into application oriented subject, and that is when you figure out things. So from a broader base, from a bottom up approach, you're moving top. And then once you move your masters, if you want to do masters, it will be even more sharp and specific. So from a generalist perspective, you're moving to a specialist perspective. This is in terms of education I'm telling. And then when you try to do a PhD, you move into even niche topics, just one particular topic, and you'll be spending 3 years on it. Okay, minimum of 3 to 4 years on only one particular topic, which means that you started as a generalist in your academic career, and then you moved as a specialist. And now when we come to a professional career, how do you start? Okay, sometimes it's a choice. You can either start as a generalist and then move to a specialist role. Or you can either start as a specialist and then as you move higher, you can go to a generalist role. So there is no concrete way of saying that generalist versus specialist. And this entire debate is constructed with respect to the administrative setup. Okay. So with respect to administrative setup, when we got independence 1947 and became republic in 1950, we had a very we inherited a bureaucracy, a civil service, which was given to us by the British. Okay, at that time there were only two functions for the bureaucracy. The British were holding us only for two reasons. One is taxation, and the second one is law and order. The bureaucracy served only those two functions. One to tax us so that they can fill the coffers of the British over there, and the second one is to maintain the law and order so that again they can tax us. So they did not need any specialist for any special works, and they had one particular thing for specialists, and that is called as railways department. Okay, they required specialists. Okay, so they recruited generalists, and then they had specialists working under the generalists. But today, looking at in the 21st century and year 2020, when our honorable prime minister came to power, the slogan that he said was maximum governance, minimum government. Okay, so the act he gave more precedence to the act than the structure or the system itself. Okay, he felt that ultimately it is enough if the act is done. You don't need a big structure to do the same act. So we'll prune down the government, whereas we'll enhance the governance aspect of it. So that is how it started. And off late, there is a huge debate that we have to reduce the role of generalists, whereas we have to include specialists into all these aspects. And this is where I'm telling you where the technocrats are entering into the fray with respect to the administrative setup and the governance aspect of it. Okay, so technocrats, when we call technocrats, I call the engineers, all the other people as technocrats. Okay, so how are we entering into this generalist domain? Okay, I'll reach it when I talk about corridors of power. I'll be establishing. Now, do we need generalists? Yes, like I said in scenario one, we needed a Tarzan because we also need to survive. Okay, and second one, do we need a specialist? Yes, when it comes to micromanaging, when it comes to doing small things, we need specialists. Okay, that I gave in this scenario two, where we required Captain America to take up the shield and protect our prime minister. Okay, so generalist versus specialist. Yes, at some time there is a conflict between generalist versus specialist, because if one could dig a bit deeper and read about the 1962 war with China, you could find a lot of discrepancy as to the army, which is the specialist, which knows what it is doing on the ground level, saying that we are at a position where we cannot advance, we cannot make a successful battle against the Chinese, whereas the defense secretary at that point of time, who was a generalist, who said that no, we have to do it, go ahead. Okay, if you could dig around that, you will identify why this debate has started. Okay, because the generalists are considered to have this something called as ivory tower attitude, which is nothing but a colonial hangover, thinking that they are superior and highly inflated egos and all these things. And so based on that aspect, whenever a specialist says something, they'll be like just dusting their suggestions under the carpet. Okay, so that is why the specialists are usually saying that okay, the generalists are not taking our plight into account. Whatever you say, they're not considering. And there are a lot. There is also leaked document about the 1962 war, where they say that because of the generalists only we lost the war. If you could dig into it, might well dig into it. But now today, how is the world seeing, and how are we going to structure this generalists and specialists? Are we going to say that okay, we are going to create certain positions and everything, and say these positions are meant for generalists, and these positions and these people are going to be generalists? For example, right now we have our deans and our principals. Okay, when you look at our principal, he does most of an administrative work than his specialist teaching job. So he has moved from a specialist to generalist. Okay, that happens. And similarly, when a HOD or a principal steps down from that position, he let goes of his generalist post and he comes back to become a specialist. He starts teaching his own core subjects. So this generalist and specialist keep shuffling today. And how are we going to integrate the specialists and generalists? That is the whole point of this construct. Okay, and for that I would like to play a video. Once the video is played, I'll continue.
Once upon a time, a turtle and a rabbit had an argument about who was faster. They decided to settle the argument with a race. The turtle and the rabbit both agreed on a route and started off the race. The rabbit shot ahead and ran briskly for some time. Then, seeing he was far ahead of the turtle, he thought he'd sit under a tree for some time and relax before continuing the race. He sat under the tree and soon fell asleep. The turtle, plodding on, overtook him and soon finished the race. Emerging as the undisputed champ, the rabbit woke up and realized that he'd lost the race. The moral of the story is that slow and steady wins the race. This is the version of the story that we've all grown up with. But our version of the story continues. The rabbit was disappointed at losing the race, and he did some thinking. He realized that he'd lost the race only because he had been overconfident, careless, and lax. If he had not taken things for granted, there's no way the turtle could have beaten him. So, he challenged the turtle to another race. The turtle agreed. This time, the rabbit went all out and ran without stopping from start to finish. He won by several miles. The moral of the story? Fast and consistent will always beat the slow and steady. It's good to be slow and steady, but it's better to be fast and reliable. But the story doesn't end here. The turtle did some thinking this time and realized that there's no way he can beat the rabbit in a race the way it was currently formatted. He thought for a while and then challenged the rabbit to another race, but on a slightly different route. The rabbit agreed. The turtle and rabbit started off. In keeping with his self-made commitment to be consistently fast, the rabbit took off and ran at top speed until he came to a broad river. The finishing line was a couple of kilometers on the other side of the river. The rabbit sat there, wondering what to do. In the meantime, the turtle trundled along, got into the river, swam to the opposite bank, continued walking, and finished the race. The moral of the story? First, identify your core competency and then change the playing field to suit your core competency. The story still hasn't ended. The turtle and rabbit by this time had become pretty good friends, and they did some thinking together. Both realized that the last race could have been run much better. So the turtle and rabbit decided to do the last race again, but to run as a team this time. They started off, and this time the rabbit carried the turtle till the riverbank. There, the turtle took over and swam across with the rabbit on his back. On the opposite bank, the rabbit again carried the turtle, and they reached the finishing line together. Both the turtle and rabbit felt a greater sense of satisfaction than they'd felt earlier. The moral of the story? It's good to be individually brilliant and to have strong core competencies, but unless you're able to work in a team and harness each other's core competencies, you'll always perform below par because there will always be situations at which you'll do poorly and someone else does well. Teamwork is mainly about situational leadership, letting the person with the relevant core competency for a situation take leadership. And that is the end of the story.
I hope every one of you have got the point that I was trying to make. Okay, it was never about generalist versus specialist. It's about generalists and specialists working together for the common objective. Okay, but the idea is that while I mean, when I said outcomes versus output, the specialists working at their levels would be concerned with the output, yes, but all these output should be collated and should result in a meaningful outcome. That is the whole point. So now we have seen the video about the core competency, how this integration of generalists and specialists has to be. Okay, for example, let's take the example of a very own organization. There is a dean, there is a principal. Okay, he is a specialist as well as a generalist. Okay, he takes care of the administration, management, registrar, etc., etc. They are generalists, whereas specialists are lecturers, assistant professors, professors, etc., etc. So now, for the entire organization to be successful, to come out with the objective set, okay, you need outputs as well as outcomes. While the generalists take care of the outcomes, the specialists take care of the outputs, and the entire success of the organization depends on these two people working together. Okay, and the need for it. Why? Previously, that wasn't the case. We appointed exclusive generalists and we employed exclusive specialists. But today, the dynamics are changing. The reason is, one is the changing nature of modernity itself. 21st century with digital revolution, we have this dynamicism. And look at the first aspect of this dynamic property. Today, we come up with schemes such as Stand Up India, Startup India, Make in India, Make for India, etc., etc. And all these things, the Mudra loan, all these things enable and want people to become entrepreneurs. And recently, after the COVID lockdown, and now with the face off with China, there is a rising trend of going Swadeshi, which means that let's employ ourselves, let's do things ourselves, let's buy our own things, let's make things ourselves, and let's make things for ours. Okay, not to export or anything. That is the difference between make in India and make for India. Previously, while the notion was to make in India, now the notion is make for India. Let's make things for ourselves, our consumption alone. Even when US president came to power, Donald Trump, he came up with this slogan called let's make America great again. When he said let's make America great again, he actually took a conservative mode where he said that let's shut down our territories. Okay, that's why he said that we'll build a wall towards Mexico, and strictening or tightening of the news around the visa, F1 visa, H1 visa, and everything. The reason is he wanted to say that okay, let's do things for ourselves. This is changing. And we talk about entrepreneurs. Today we see graduates from IITs and other NITs, other technocrats who have ideas, and those are specialist ideas. When you come out of a technical institute, you come out with technical knowledge, but then transforming that idea into reality. Okay, when you want to make it marketable, then you're entering into domains of economic systems. You enter into domains of economic systems, you can start small or you can go big. When you try to go big, you go into stock exchange, you try to go into initial public offering, how to build up a partnership. What is the difference between a partnership and a limited liability company and an unlimited liability company, and all these things. So the dynamics are completely changing as of today. So it's not about being a specialist, and it's also about knowing other things also, and rapidly changing nature of work. Okay, the previous example I've often quoted, the same example as take our beloved principal. He is a professor as well as a principal. The changing nature of work, and today a lot of things happen over negotiating and lobbying, and this requires a different set of skills which a specialist who has a tunnel vision, who is too much oriented into himself alone cannot do. Okay, then the other aspect is globalization, integration of the world. Okay, you have to know what is happening around the world, have to know not just your technical knowledge, have to know other aspects around you also. And more importantly, today, just as in the core competency, they were talking about teamwork, situational leadership. Okay, and there is one particular management professional called Mary Parker Foley. Okay, Mary Parker Foley is considered as mother of modern management. She came out with this conflict resolution initially. How do you, if at all a conflict comes, how do we resolve? Okay, she talked about three ways in which you can resolve. Number one, conflict resolution by domination, where if there is a conflict between two persons, one person will dominate the other person and suppress the other person and ensure that his decision prevails. That is by domination. Second one is by compromise, conflict resolution by compromise. You try to resolve a conflict, you ultimately give up something so that the entire organization survives. It's like taking one for the team. We used to say, right, taking one for the team. When Sergio Ramos made a foul tackle on Mo Salah, it was considered as a foul tackle, but still it was said that okay, he took one for the team. Okay, so that is by compromise. And the third one, what we call as by integration. Integration is nothing but how to bring both of them onto the same platform and resolve everything and ensure that the organizational objective survives. Okay, and for that to happen, she also described three kinds of leadership. One is positional leadership, second one is personality leadership, and the third one is functional leadership. Okay, positional leadership is when you appoint a person to become the CEO, okay, of a particular company. he enjoys the power. He becomes the leader by the position vested with him. Okay, so that is called positional leadership. And then we have personality leadership, where the individual's personal aura, the individual's personality itself is so huge that he naturally becomes a leader. Those are natural born leaders. Usually these type of personality cults and personality leaders we find in political realm. These people quickly move away to that aspect. And then we have functional leadership. This is so similar to core competency, where in core competency in the video they said that whoever is competent in the given situation, whoever has the better domain knowledge will take over the leadership of that aspect. So this is called functional leadership. And I'll explain functional leadership in the current scenario. Today we see, okay, COVID-19 has happened, coronavirus is spreading rapid and fast, and who are we giving this aspect of leading us out of this coronavirus? Every state, it starts with the health ministry. The other ministries, the other departments are not entering into the fray. It starts with the health ministry. And the health ministry, what it does, the health minister is not a person with the core competency to understand what is happening. He's a political representative. He doesn't have the I'm not selling political competency, I'm telling the technical competency of understanding what COVID is or what coronavirus is, how to treat and everything. He delegates that function to his secretary, health secretary. And his health secretary, a doctor, is a physician, is he an epidemiologist, or has he been working in the field of virology and all this aspects, pandemics? No. Okay, he is a bureaucrat. Possibly he could be a doctor, MBBS holder, but most or often not. He could be just any degree holder, could have spent a few years in the health ministry itself, and he would have reached the position of health secretary. And what does he do? Does he have the knowledge? No. So immediately what he does is he looks for the next best option. He goes for the chief medical officer or the district, medical supplies office. Okay, we have DMS and all, Department of Medical Supplies. Okay, they look for it. And then they look at premier institutions. Okay, premier institutions, medicinal institutions in the state. Right now, let's take state alone, because the center has already delegated all these things to the states to take care of themselves. And almost all 29 states have their own teams working, their own plans. We have 29 teams and 29 plans working in one India. Okay, that is the sort of legacy that we have inherited as of today. Okay, so now let's take our own state. Okay, for example, let's look at a larger state called Tamil Nadu. They have their own medical experts. They look at medical Stanley Medical College, etc. They recruit people from there. They form a core team. They are the experts and they lead the war against corona. They say that, okay, this is a virus. These are the steps that we are taking. This is the medicines that we require. These are the dosages we require. And also, this is one aspect of it. Okay, they are the ones who are going to diagnose. They are the ones who are going to prescribe medicines, prescribe the dosages, etc., etc. Then, to make the supplies, how many do we need? What is required? For that, we entail the help of statisticians, data statistics, who look at crunch numbers. Okay, the spreading rate of the virus, the migration or movement of the people among the state itself, the in-migration, the out-migration, they calculate all these things, the fatality, everything, and they come up with numbers. And that is how we have these projections, right? By December end, almost 65% of Indian population would have been exposed to coronavirus. Who gives these numbers? It is given by a statistician. But he is not leading, but with respect to his domain, with respect to crunching numbers, with respect to coming out with perspectives are based on those numbers, it is the statistician. With respect to diagnosis and the treatment, it is the medical practitioner or the expert committee. And what does the Home Secretary actually does? He enables the functioning of all these things. So unless, so far we have never stressed on this concept of functional leadership as much as we are stressing it today because of coronavirus. It's unfortunate that a virus has to come and make sure that we are supposed to, how the leadership has to function, functional leadership. But if at all COVID-19 hasn't come, the things would have been different. Okay, it's always the bureaucrats. They obviously, it's an open secret that everyone knows that what is happening. Okay, and so now what is required? Forget about the state bureaucracy and everything. Even among the careers, any career you take, be it among the software fields or the technical fields, service sector or the core sector, any sector you take, the underlying theme is that we need specialization of generalists and generalization of specialists. You cannot be just a specialist, you cannot be just a specialist. Okay, you need to generalize certain aspects as well as the specialists need to the generalists also need to specialize certain aspects. Otherwise, it is very difficult. I mean, we live in a integrated setup, society, system, whatever, however we want to view it. And for an integrated system, if everyone has to survive, everyone has to come together. Okay, and how do we come together? Understanding the other aspects. So only when a specialist is able to understand the general certain things about generalization, he values his contribution, he knows how he is contributing. Similarly, the generalist also needs to know the role of specialist, because only then he would trust. Okay, he would trust that, okay, this person is going to see. The example of COVID we can take, like the functional leadership. The home secretary trusted the vision of the statistician, trusted the treatment of the, and that is what is being delivered to every one of us. Now, moving on to corridors of justice. Okay, corridors of justice, since I practiced it, I'll give you a brief description. I mean, another 13 minutes is left. I'll give you a brief description. Okay, firstly, the art of advocacy. So how do we go about art of advocacy? We are going to integrate both the specialist and generalist debate into this also. So when we start up with advocacy profession, we start as generalists. We start at the lower level as a junior to a senior advocate and etc. And at that level, we'll be doing a lot of work. We'll be engaging in a lot of work. We'll be going to not just one court. We'll be looking at different varieties of cases. Okay, family courts we'll be doing environmental litigation, we'll be doing civil cases, we'll be doing property disputes, we'll be doing tribunals. We have administrative tribunals, we have debt recovery tribunals, national company law tribunals, and all these things. So we'll be dealing with all sorts of cases. And then when we gain experience at the lower level, we identify where do we want to move. I mean, it depends. Sometimes you're good at certain aspects in certain types of litigation, and in certain types of you're not so good at. So you'll say, okay, I'll be moving towards it. In certain types of litigation, there is more money involved. For example, when you take the taxation aspect of it, taxation cases are hugely profitable. And then you have patent litigation, IPR related litigations are hugely profitable. You can mint money. IPR advocates mint money. Okay, so they move. So it is about what do you want? You want to move for money? Yes, good. And some people are okay with, I mean, for taxation and IPR, you will be getting only 3 to 4 cases. Okay, and you have to mint money out of it. Whereas when you go to property cases or family courts, you're getting more number of cases. It is like small pebbles accumulating into a big brick. And the other one is getting big bricks. Okay, so we generally start as generalists, and then as we grow higher, we move to specialists. And then the entire art of advocacy. This is where I said that EQ comes into place. Okay, where knowing the judge is more important than knowing the law. When I mean knowing the judge, is not knowing the judge personally. I said knowing the judge, it is knowing the court craft. How is the judge? What is this judge capable of doing? I mean, every courtroom has a different set of, every judge brings his own individual personality into the courtroom. So you have to understand the judge. What does he expect? What should we do? I mean, ultimately winning the case matters. That is why we are all doing what we do. Okay, so to win, we have to first understand the judge. And this is where no matter how good your drafting is, how good your arguments are, how good the merits are in your case, still if you don't understand the judge, you're going to lose the case. Okay, so this is where more than your IQ, your EQ is required. And then the entire art of advocacy revolves around one thing: find the unseen and judge the unknown. This is the even saying. Okay, we have to look for loopholes. We are trained to look for loopholes. Okay, whatever is on the line, no, that is not what we seek for. We look for things that is unseen. Okay, between the lines, between letters. Okay, and judge the unknown. We have no clue what is happening on the other side or anything, but still we have to come up with a judgment. We have to come up with an opinion. Of course, all advocates, most of them are opinionated, but how do you arrive at the opinion? I mean, being judgmental, yes, advocates come to an aspect where we are opinionated and we are judgmental, but how do you arrive at that is the most important thing. Is it based on constructive deliberation? If your opinion or your judgment you have arrived at based on constructive deliberation, then that is a good opinion and a good judgment. Okay, we do take stands. We have opinion about everything. We do take stands on everything, and we justify everything. We winning and losing is another aspect, but we do justify everything. Okay, and how do we work? I mean, this is a ubiquitous statement which is applicable to most of the professions, but still I'll let you know. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend 4 hours sharpening the axe. This was given by Abraham Lincoln, and it more aptly applies to us also. Because we'll be arguing the case in a courtroom for just 15 minutes. And for that 15 minutes, the amount of work we put for this will take 2 weeks to 3 weeks. We'll be working like 12 hours, 13 hours on one particular case to come out with a document and merits and everything. Our research is so wide to come out with that, and all that for arguing for 15 minutes in a courtroom. So for 15 minutes, we'll be spending hours and days and at times weeks together to come out with it. And now coming to even closer. So what are the opportunities that as technocrats we have in the field of legal domain? First of all, let me tell you something. These advocates commission expert committees. Okay, most of the judges or the advocates have no clue about the technicalities. Okay, they have no clue. So what they do is, if the judge doesn't understand anything, usually it happens. Okay, they are not good at technical stuff. Okay, there was once an issue where the advocate did not know what a radioactive element is. It was a case dealing with major minerals and minor minerals. It was in the Madras High Court. It was a case dealing with major minerals and minor minerals. And there was this one argument. One advocate was a senior counsel who wouldn't take the name. Okay, he was arguing on that behalf, saying that radioactive minerals are nothing but they have some radioactive effects. When it starts at the high of the mountains, it will have radioactivity. When it comes down, it will lose its radioactivity. And I was like, I was standing on the other end, and I was just watching in bemusement. And it wasn't my case. I can't barge in. I can't say anything. I was just watching bemusement, and even the judge had no clue. There was no other advocate trying to object that statement or trying to do anything. Okay, so that sort of lack of technical knowledge exists among the judiciary. And it is at that point, what does the judiciary do? It doesn't just give the judgment. The judge did not give judgment based on whatever the misstatement that was presented in front of the judge by that advocate. So what he did was he appointed an expert committee, which consists of experts. And how do you become part of that expert committee? By being a top ranked specialist. And how do these expert committees arise? Generally, the expert committee, advocates commission is also an expert committee where 1 or 2 advocates will be part of that commission, and they will also include certain experts to bring about the awakening or enlightenment with respect to that subject matter. So when the expert committee comes, they will appoint the expert committee. For example, when this, I'll give a very live example of this expert committee. People from Chennai, Tamil Nadu, they know about the river called Kuvam. Okay, Kuvam, and they have something called as CRRT, Kuvam River Restoration Trust. And who are manned by this river? These are the expert committees. Who are manned by these? Who man these expert committees are technical hydrologists. Okay, chemical analysis. So such technical people are employed. And as part of the advocate commission, as part of being an expert committees, you'll come up with reports. There was one particular case where Tamil Nadu Thermal Corporation was polluting the Ennore Creek, and there we appointed an expert committee that required around 6 experts in different fields. We got people from Anna University, we got people from IIT Madras, we got people from Annamalai University, etc. Specialists into that field to form an expert committee, and they are paid good. Okay, in that expert committee, which I said Ennore Creek expert committee, okay, each person was paid around 50,000 for a 7-day work. They only visited the place for 2 or 3 times. They collected samples and everything. They came out with a report, and it took only 1 week. There were 6 people, and each one was given 50,000 rupees. Okay. Similarly, the other opportunities are policy making and analysis, where a lot of PRS India is there, a lot of policy analysis, think tanks, etc., where they use technocrats' knowledge to come out with the better policies. For example, today, the laws that are made by the parliament or anything, they delegate certain technical details. Okay, for example, if a pollution control board is an administrative body which is manned by experts, by specialists. And the most important things are the tribunals in the IPR. Tribunals are nothing but quasi-judicial bodies. Quasi-judicial bodies, when we say quasi-judicial bodies, we mean to say that they are bodies which take care of, they are specialized to take care of disputes arising out of a specific place, specific knowledge. For example, we have National Green Tribunal, which takes care of disputes arising out of environmental issues. Similarly, we have Administrative Tribunal. Similarly, we have Water Tribunal. Similarly, we have the Pollution Control Board Tribunal. We have TRI has its own tribunal. We have several other tribunals, Income Tax Tribunal. So they And one important aspect of these tribunals is there will be always a bench. A bench means there will be two members and who judge. And the first person would be a judicial member, and the second member would always be a technical member. And when we say technical member for that particular domain, if we require such, you can have electricity tribunal also. So when you go to electricity tribunal, there will be a specific member who knows electrical electronics engineering, power systems, etc., who would come out with the verdict. And most importantly, the last aspect is IPR, intellectual property rights. Okay, you have this exam coming up called as patent agent exam. It was conducted in 2018. Prior to that, in the year 2013 or 15, I guess, and then again 2020 they came up with. And patent agent has to exclusively have technical knowledge. Okay, once you become a patent agent, after 10 years of being a registered patent agent, you have the opportunity to become from a specialist, you're moving to a generalist. Okay, you're a patent agent as a specialist, and then you're moving towards becoming assistant registrar, which is a generalist post. Okay, and then the corridors of power. Okay, I'll briefly explain this. Okay, time is up, I guess. There are, I mean, when you talk about power, corridors of power, there are only two things. One is called legislative, the other one is executive. Legislative, MLAs and MPs constitute the legislative aspect of it. Then we come to the executive aspect of it. When we come to the executive aspect of this, then again we have two persons. One is called the political executive and the other one is called the permanent executive. Political executives are prime ministers, council of ministers, home ministers, etc., etc. And it is the permanent executives that we are more concerned about right now. Permanent execute, I mean, it is untold and it is not seen, but they are the real holders of power. They play with the power. I mean, even the political executive is and the legislative are totally dependent on the bureaucrats for getting things done, even for the getting ideas. Okay, who do I mean? How do you think the policies come out, or the speeches that our prime minister gives out? Those are all written by permanent executives. Okay, so that important. They are the ultimate people who hold all the power. Okay, the first aspect is how to become the one. You know that you have the UPSC exam. I think at 4 o'clock we have another session where a real bureaucrat is going to come. Probably he can explain all these things better. Okay, and how to be one. Let me tell you very simply. Okay, it is not the toughest exam, UPSC exam, but why you feel it's tough is because it's the lengthiest exam, which means that by the time you complete the process itself, 1 year will go. Okay, the exam process itself. Okay, and when you fail, you have to start again from the scratch for another 1 year. So which means that it is training, and that makes it tough. So what do you need? You need consistency, and everyone else around you is going to be flying, but you're going to be stagnant. So you need a lot of self-motivation and perseverance. Okay, and this is one of the exams where they're going to trust truly your emotional quotient and not your IQ. And then how are technocrats associated with these corridors of power, this interaction? Okay, as technocrats, when you come out, how can you get associated with these? I mean, you're a specialist right now, how to become a generalist? Okay, so this number one is PSUs, public sector analysts like BHEL, ISRO, DRDO, CDAC, all these people, they directly recruit through recruitment processes. Okay, you can write the exams, you can become part of the technocrats, and as you get promoted, you will become a generalist. And that is the same aspect when I mentioned exactly, direct recruitments into departments. And then we have expert committees, not just the court, even the government appoints expert committees. For example, when they talked about Western Ghats, they appointed Dr. Madhav Gadgil committee, who was an expert environmentalist. Okay, so similarly, you appoint expert committees, and where you require technical people. For example, grid connectivity. How do you connect the southern grid with the northern electrical grid? And all these things are done by technical people. Okay, so you require expert committees, and the state itself appoints expert committees. And then the most important thing today, almost every state indulges consultancies, private consultancies, to do a lot of their work. One of my friends is working in Rajasthan in a private consultancy. Okay, he is working in Delhi. He's based in Delhi, but a project came to him where it was basically a power systems project where the Delhi government, was 3 years back, I guess, the Delhi government, Rajasthan government had approached this consultancy to figure out why the particular electricity department is making huge losses. Okay, and how to turn it into a profit-making organization. So then they approached this consultancy, and this fellow is not an engineer; he was a management professional, and so immediately they looked for experts in that field. Okay, and through that consultancy, they came out with the solution, and they engaged with the Rajasthan government to resolve this issue. And think tanks and Niti Aayog and all these things are aspects where the specialists or the technocrats can directly get engaged with the corridors of power. And with this, I end my presentation. And if at all there are any questions, you can always pop up.
Thank you, sir, for providing us with a very clear insight on the topic. And we have one question from our audience,
Yes.
which is being a specialist or a generalist is better. So, what do you suggest on that? And during in times of quarantine, who are in need? Like, do we need a generalist or a specialist?
Like I said, we need generalization of specialized and specialization of generalists. For example, I'll quote the, let's take the current example itself. Like I have already explained, I will give you a brief example also. See, we needed face masks and we needed PPE kits. Okay, but that is not, who tells that we need these things? It is the epidemiologists, it is the physicians who come up with solutions saying that it is spreading through this way. Okay, and that is being told by certain people. But do they have the view or the broader view to go and get these things? Okay, so ultimately who resources all these things, and that is a generalist. Okay, so like I said, we need both generalists and specialists to work together. Okay, it's not like pitting one against the other. Okay, and I also explained in the terms of core competency where I said that yes, we have to leave it to the situation where the leadership should be functional. When it comes to the ground level treating the patients, we leave it to the physicians. The generalists do not interfere. But when we need medical supplies, when we need the factories to function, how are the factories going to function? We face shortage of PPE kits, personal protection equipment kits. We face shortage. So what did they do? The central government was not able to resource everything. So immediately, what the state government did, it opened the Tirupur, the garments factories. It opened the Tirupur garments factories, directed them how to. They gave the technical details, all the measurements, what is required, and everything, and asked them to manufacture them. So this cannot be done by a physician, right? He's a specialist. He's not going to do this. So at this aspect, even for specialists, we require generalists. So it is not about pitting one against the other, but it is about both of them going together.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the clarity on that. So I think we have come to the end of the session. Thank you for being there, sir.